Hello, you're watching the Screaming Fish here, people, and once again I am here for you guys with yet another video, and this time we are taking a look at The Fate of the Furious, aka Fast and Furious 8. Personally, I prefer The Fate of the Furious. That's a better title, or Fast and Furious. Just call it what you want. Fast and Furious 8, Furious 8, Fast 8, The Fate of the Furious, or just whatever you want to call it. Just, yeah. So, anyway, I saw The Fate of the Furious yesterday. Well, at least that's the time I'm recording this video. I might be able to release the video on the same day. You never know. Who knows? Anywho, yeah. So I saw The Fate of the Furious, and now I'm here to share my thoughts on it with you guys. So, yeah. Let's do what we usually do, and yeah, just let's do that. Yeah, I did what I did in the last video. Well done, Jack Fisher. Anywho, let's get on with it. Enough of this awkward business, so yeah, let's go. I'm a pretty big fan of the Fast and Furious franchise. I've liked pretty much all the movies in this series, although I will admit some are better than others. So as you can imagine, I was pretty excited for The Fate of the Furious. I was very interested to see where the series would go after Furious 7, and also very interested to see what Straight Outta Compton director F. Gary Gray could bring to this franchise. However, now that the film has actually been released in cinemas, and the fact that I've just seen this movie, it is time to ask the question that I ask in the description of nearly all my reviews on YouTube. Is this movie any good? First off, let's talk about the cast. The cast of the Fast and Furious series remains to this day one of my favourite casts of all time. Watching all these characters interact with each other is always such a treat, particularly in this film. Vin Diesel, as always, is great in this movie. I've always found the character of Dominic Toretto to be really interesting and compelling, and it's honestly really emotional watching this character being forced to go up against the people he calls family. And the reason for Dom actually switching sides and going up against his team is equally emotional and all the more heartbreaking. Which is where I really have to praise the villain of this movie. Charlize Theron as the main villain, Cypher, was absolutely terrifying. Yes, admittedly she does come across as a bit of a Bond villain at times, but overall Cypher for me is easily by far the best villain this series has ever had. The way she manipulates and mentally tortures Dom in this movie alone shows how intimidating she really is. Her interactions with Dom in this movie always had this level of suspense within them that never failed to give me goosebumps. So yeah, Cypher is a really cool character in this movie, and I'm interested to see where this character pops up next. So now for everyone else. Michelle Rodriguez, as per usual, is fantastic in this movie. I've always found the romance between her and Dom to be really touching, and I think the romance between these two characters is more realised in this film than it ever has been, which I thought was really refreshing to see, because that is one of the few things in the other movies that I thought needed to be fleshed out a heck of a lot more than it was, and that was good to see. Tyrese Gibson as Roman Pierce is great in this movie. As always, he makes for great comic relief and humour, but overall he's really fun whenever he's on screen, and almost always steals the show in terms of comedy. Ludacris is also really good in this movie. I've always enjoyed the character of Tetch in these films, and I still really like him in this film. Nathalie Emmanuel, I apologise if I pronounced that wrong, as Ramsey was really good. I would have liked to have seen a little more of her, but still, good performance. Kurt Russell was one of my favourite new additions to the franchise in Furious 7, and I absolutely loved him in this film. While he doesn't have a really badass action sequence like he did in 7, he is still as entertaining to watch on screen as he was in 7. I actually ended up liking Scott Eastwood a lot more than I thought I would in this movie. It was cool to see him in a role that's actually integral to the plot, and his interactions with Tyrese Gibson in particular are just gold. However, it is in fact Dwayne Johnson and Jason Statham that absolutely steal the show in this movie. I was laughing my butt off every time these two were in the same room together. The insults these two threw at each other got funnier as the film progressed, and every time it had me laughing. Also, Jason Statham has an action sequence in this movie that is both badass in every possible way and absolutely hilarious. The action sequences in The Fate of the Furious are unsurprisingly awesome, in particular an action sequence that takes place in a prison. I really got to say, I enjoyed the hand-to-hand combat in this film a lot more than I did in 5, 6 or 7. It was shot really well, and I think they did an excellent job with the choreography in this movie. But trust me, it doesn't just stop there. The action sequences that involve slick looking cars are also great. You see, the Fast and Furious movies are basically guilty pleasure action movies that do not obey the laws of physics at all, and where the characters do crazy stunts that could kill them, and yet they walk out of them without breaking a single bone, while adding a surprisingly yet satisfying amount of emotional depth to the story and characters, and the Fate of the Furious is no exception to that. The action does not obey any of the laws of physics at all, and while there are people who will not like this film simply because of that, fans of guilty pleasure action movies and this franchise as a whole are going to absolutely love this movie the same way I did. I will admit though, the action does become a little repetitive at times, but overall it is pretty darn entertaining. I also really like the visual effects in this movie. For the most part they were virtually flawless, with one or two exceptions. But particularly in the final battle of this film, they're pretty amazing, so congrats to the visual effects team. I also have to say, this film is directed really well. It's shot beautifully, and thank God there is absolutely no shaky cam in this movie at all. But really, you can tell that F. Gary Gray was really trying his hardest with this film, and it really does pay off because I think The Fate of the Furious is the best directed Fast and Furious movie we've had so far. I really have to say, by far the craziest action sequence involves people hacking cars and remote controlling them like they're playing Forza Horizon on PC or something. I won't get too much into that sequence because I'll end up spoiling it for you, but I'm just letting you know that is by far the craziest part of this movie. I also really enjoyed the callbacks to previous movies and characters that have been and gone in other movies. There's actually a really emotional callback to Paul Walker's character in this movie that I'm sure is going to be a tearjerker for most people. Which, by the way, Paul Walker, amazing actor. He was such a good actor, believe me. May he rest in peace. He will be missed dearly. I also really got to say that this is definitely one of the more emotional films in this franchise. While there isn't anything that had me crying like there was in Furious 7, yes, I cried during Furious 7. Don't judge me. It is definitely sad watching the team go up against the one person that brought them together in the first place, and there are a lot of scenes in this movie where you really feel for this team at the decisions they are forced to make. Unfortunately, as much as I really hate to say this, The Fate of the Furious is not a perfect movie. The film does admittedly have some noticeable flaws. For starters, the first half of this movie is actually incredible. There's almost nothing wrong with it. But the second half of this movie, while still really, really good, I felt lost its emotional grip and all of a sudden became a little predictable, and were then treated to all the same tropes this franchise is known for. Now in some cases, that isn't a bad thing, as it's still really entertaining, but it's because of this that the film loses some of its momentum. The film even ends almost exactly the same way as 5, 6, and 7. Again, in some cases it's not a bad thing, as it never fails to entertain. It's just, I was a little bit annoyed that they didn't really try anything different with how the film ended, and it just felt a little rushed to me. There are a few points in the second act of this movie where the characters are just sitting down trying to figure out how to catch Dom, and talking about this software called God's Eye that they can use to find literally anyone in the world, and it just goes on for way too long, and I did get to a point during those points where I was thinking, can we please just get back to car chases and Dom becoming a bad guy, please? I would also say that the final battle of this film goes on for way, way too long, and while I did enjoy the final battle of the film, it just drags on for so long to the point where I actually started to get bored. But thankfully, there was enough going on in that scene to keep me entertained, so I enjoyed the final battle for the most part, but I think it could have been a little shorter. I also think that the film has some pacing issues in the first act mainly. The first half of this movie is still the most enjoyable part of the film, but I think the film got into the whole Dom going rogue and betraying his team to go work with Cypher a little too quickly for my liking. And I'm going to be completely honest here, while The Fate of the Furious definitely has a strong emotional depth to it, I will admit that I didn't have the same emotionally driven or compelling experience I did watching 5, 6, or 7 for that matter. All three of those films hit me in places I wasn't expecting them to, which is part of the reason I love all three of those films so much. But unfortunately, while again there's plenty of emotional depth in this film, it wasn't as strong as it was in 5, 6, and 7. And that is due to pacing in my opinion, and basically using the same story elements as the last few films. They never really go anywhere different in the second half of the film like they did in the first half, which was a bit disappointing. And I will admit, I was a tiny bit disappointed at the film overall. However, The Fate of the Furious is by no stretch a bad movie. It is still a fantastic movie and just as entertaining as the other movies. So despite its flaws, The Fate of the Furious is yet another heartfelt, entertaining, and just genuinely awesome blockbuster that is sure to be a crowd pleaser. And I will admit, I am disappointed that it went from an incredible movie to a pretty good movie in the second half. But overall, I still really enjoyed the movie, and it's definitely gotten me excited for future sequels and potential spin-offs this franchise has in store for us. So guys, those were my thoughts on The Fate of the Furious. I do hope you enjoyed this video. I really do recommend you go see The Fate of the Furious. It is still a really fun time despite its flaws. I would say that 5, 6, and 7 are all better than this movie, but it is definitely still a fun watch nonetheless. So go see it with your mates, you're gonna have a real fun time. So guys, unfortunately, you must excuse me now because, you see, last time I talked about this franchise, I said that my brother, Josh, owed me a 10-second car. Now, it has been a year since I said that, and he still hasn't fulfilled his promise. What a shame. So, you know, I've got to do the brotherly thing and pay him a visit. So, yeah, I'll go do that. Hey, Josh? Come here, I've got a present for you. Hey, you know that 10-second car?